Greetings from Australia. I would like to respectfully acknowledge the people of India and thank them for the warm welcome and allowing us to speak and share our knowledge in this virtual space. I would like to acknowledge our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the Indigenous peoples of Australia and to recognise their ongoing connections with the land and the sea. Aboriginal or Indigenous Australians are still part of the Commonwealth, comprising of the mainland of the Australian continent, Tasmania in the extreme south, and the Torres Strait Islands between far north Queensland and Papua New Guinea. Today, Indigenous people make up just over 3% of the total population, which has been estimated at approximately 26 million people in 2020. We fly 3 flags on our public buildings, and during national celebrations like NAIDOC Week, we fly the national flag, the Aboriginal flag, and the Torres Strait Islander flag. We are not one group. There are over 500 different clan groups or nations around the continent, with many having their own distinct cultures, beliefs, and languages that are still practiced today. Artists continue to hold onto their cultural and spiritual beginnings and continually make reference to their heritage in their work, evident as artists present their work for significant showcase events like the Cairns Indigenous Art Fair. Our land is so diverse. The environments and landscapes from which we draw inspiration is an ever-flowing stream of visual stories and messages we want to convey through our work. Totems, designs and stories shared by our First Nation artists are protected by copyright unless permission is given by the creator or the creators who have worked to execute a collective work. Australian Indigenous author and solicitor Dr. Terry Janke said the protocols endorse the rights of Indigenous people to their cultural heritage and support diverse First Nations creative practice. NAIDOC Week is an opportunity for us to celebrate the rich history, culture and achievements of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. This year's theme is a common mantra: always was, always will be Aboriginal land.
Welcome everyone to a series of creative conversations on the theme of cultural linkages between Australian and Indian artists, hosted by Arts Nexus, Far North Queensland, in partnership with the Cairns Indigenous Art Fair and the Australian Consulate based in Chennai, India. Our series of conversations is celebrating NAIDOC Week 2020 in Australia, National Aboriginal and Islander Day of Celebration. We are Australia's First Nations people, and each year NAIDOC Week celebrates the rich and diverse cultures of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. NAIDOC welcomes you to celebrate with us, so please enjoy the conversations as we have a lineup of notable and distinguished guests with us waiting to talk to you. We would like to acknowledge the Gimoy, Walabara, Yidinji and Irrigadanji Nation, the traditional owners of the land on which we are streaming this conversation, and to all First Nations people from the lands which you are watching from. We would like to pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and thank the people of India for welcoming and allowing us to speak in this shared virtual space. Our program today follows yesterday's session, Cultural Exchange and its role in soft power. My name is Jenna Warry and I'm the Regional Arts Officer for Far North Queensland, Regional Arts Service Network, an initiative of the Queensland Government through Arts Queensland, managed by Arts Nexus, a support agency that enables creatives and artists across all art forms, across all experience levels and all cultures in our Far North Queensland regions, which includes Cape York and the Torres Straits. Our conversation today is, when will I see you again? Our guests have been chosen to talk about the ways they have used their knowledge and lived experiences and pass on their knowledge, and I thank them for that. We will explore how we can take forward what we have done in the past and how to take this into the future. We now have the opportunity to grow together and connect globally. Networks have kept us together and found new collaborations and colleagues in a way we have never imagined was possible. Even though lockdowns and isolation, people are creating, selling, teaching, learning, and mentoring globally. I will let our guests today introduce yourselves, 2 minutes each to talk about yourself, but look up their legacies. There's a lot to be said about the panelists that we have brought on board today. Can I invite Janina Harding to introduce yourself first? Thank you, Janina.
Thanks, Janawari. My name is Janina Harding. I'm the Artistic Director for the Cairns Indigenous Art Fair. I'm originally from the Torres Strait, from Erub and Mer, the Eastern Islands of the Torres Strait, and I also have connections to country on mainland Australia, on the east, far northeast side of Cape York. I grew up in Melbourne and have lived in Cairns for the past 5 or 6 years, but have always connected to Cairns and to the Torres Strait and to the far north Queensland, just through travelling here every year, annual pilgrimage every year, you know, for Christmas holidays and that kind of thing with family. So my role at CIAF has been very special because I've been able to reconnect and actually build the platform and make it very exciting for our artists up here. And having been part of this, it's been extraordinary, you know, talking to India these past couple of days. So thank you for the opportunity, Arts Nexus, and to the Indian Consulate for letting me speak. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Janina. Gina was presented the Cairns Indigenous Art Fair on Friday the 6th at the opening ceremony prior to our series of talks. Diat, how would you like to be able to give us a little bit of an insight about yourself? Thanks. Unmute.
My name's Diat Alfrink. I'm from the Kalalagoya language group, Western Torres Strait. I live in the Torres Straits. I've been living back in my homeland there for about 10 years, but I actually grew up in outback South Australia. That was a different experience as a Torres Strait Islander person. So artist, producer, working currently at the Torres Strait Islander Media Association, working with community there and doing some exciting stuff, mainly developing performing arts in the region and also obviously broadcasting radio service there.
Thank you, Diat. Rashira Das, can I invite you to say a little bit about yourself? Thank you.
Thank you, January, and thank you to everyone who's invited me to speak. And I look forward to sharing my views and listening to all the other brilliant panelists who are here. To introduce myself, I'm an arts leader with more than 20 years experience based in India, and someone who's always been fond of wearing multiple hats. Currently, my work finds me bringing imaginative experiences for children and young people through an organization I founded called Think Arts. I'm also working in creating capacity building opportunities for arts managers across South Asia through Art Think South Asia, an organization that I'm a deputy director of. And my newest hat is that of the artistic director of a multi-art space called Artshila, which is set to launch next year. And it's brilliant to be able to imagine bringing a new art space to life. And I've been lucky in the last few years to have interacted with several Australian colleagues and visited and seen several art spaces there, which has always been inspiring, and it's great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Dipti, like to invite you to come on and tell us a little bit about yourself. Dipti Rayo.
Thanks, January, and thank you to Arts Nexus and Arts Front for putting all of this together. I think it's wonderful. And thank you also for inviting us from India to be part of this conversation. My name is Dipti. I work and live in Bangalore in the south of India. And I'm very lucky to work with a team that I find a lot of resonance with in terms of my approach to the arts and culture sector. I work with a company called the ArtX company that's based in Mumbai and Bangalore. We are an arts consultancy, and we work in different areas, which include consulting, curation, audience development. But we also do research in the arts, which is an area in India especially that needs a lot more work. Much of our work is interdisciplinary and collaborative, and we've been lucky to work with several international cultural organizations, including the Australia Consulate and the Australia Council, but also the British Council, Goethe Institute, especially the Mumbai branch. And one of our key projects is Arts and Culture Resources India, ACRI, which is a platform for arts and culture professionals for knowledge sharing, networking, and learning and development. It's one of the few neutral spaces that exist in the arts, and we're very happy to be able to contribute to the cultural sector as much as possible. So thank you again, January, and look forward to this conversation.
Yes, indeed. Priya Srinivasan, can I ask you to come on now and tell us a little bit about yourself? Thank you.
Thank you. Namaskar. My name is Priya, and I'm currently living on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation in Nam. I'm originally from Tamil Nadu in Chennai, and I came to Australia as a young child migrant and grew up here in Nam, and really was exposed to Indigenous cultures very early because I was often mistaken for being a First Nations person growing up. And I sort of claimed that because really in popular culture and in sort of representational spaces in Australia, there was only whiteness. And when I actually found out who the First Nations people were, I really felt myself in solidarity, although not understanding why exactly. And it wasn't until I grew up and I grew older that I began understanding the complexity. And it also set me off thinking about the relationship between India and First Nations cultures that have actually existed for thousands of years, and more research and data started to come out. But as a dancer, primarily growing up here, I found myself connecting on many levels to Indigenous thought, Indigenous culture and practices. I worked professionally for a dance company growing up here in Nam, and then I left. I lived in America for several years, and then I lived in China and Holland. And in all these places, I sort of worked towards racial justice, and I became much more, I had lots more clarity about who I was growing up in Australia when I left it. And I actually understood it much more in the US when I looked at different kinds of issues around policy making, what was affirmative action, how to understand myself in relation to other people of color, First Nations artists, and people of color in the US, and Black and Indigenous rights. So I think only came into political understanding after I left Australia. And then I lived in China, and I ended up working with the Indian and the Chinese government for many years, using arts as, towards diplomacy, soft power approaches to diplomacy. And then in Holland, I began sort of really thinking about decolonization and sort of working with arts organizations and institutions and museums in particular, especially as the Dutch were starting to think about what decolonization meant, always from the perspective of an artist, but also from my academic background. I have a PhD in a field called performance studies, and I wrote a book called Sweating Saris, Indian Dance as Transnational Labor, which brings all of these questions together around power, race, and the body. But I suppose what brought me back to Australia was a dream that I had, a dream of the red earth and flying above the red earth. And I felt like it was actually time to come home in a way. And I didn't know if return was possible, but it felt like this is where I really could contribute the most. And since I've been back, I've really been able to work with a lot of First Nations collaborators in working towards systemic change through the arts to decolonize the museum. I've worked with artists both in from Gunditj Mara country and also Yuin country, and then up in Northern Territory, Larrakia country and Yolngu artists. And we actually traveled to Australia, and I have to thank the Australian High Commission in India, in Chennai in particular, that supported us for Australia Festival in India on a collaborative feminist project called Churning Waters. And that's, I just want to leave it there just to say I'm really happy and excited to be a part of this conversation.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it. How have artists been responding to the COVID situation? What have people been doing during this time? Some in isolations, others in lockdown, and others who have been working longer hours in day jobs. Janina, would you like to have some conversation around that?
I can only share what I've heard. You know,
fantastic.
Yeah, just from what we've heard around, from particularly our artists that are based in art centres. When COVID happened, you know, earlier this year, so around March time, we all had to. Everyone was sort of in shock and horror. What were we going to do? For us, it was about, are we going to present? We obviously can't present it physically, a physical event. So this kind of made us sort of talk. Get in touch with artists to find out where they were at and what they wanted to do. So basically, what a lot of artists did was go on country, go back to their homelands. They all took off and went fishing.
Wow.
Lived off, you know, went back to nature again, and basically went back to culture. That's pretty much what happened up here. I know just across over at Yarrabah, which is only about a 45-minute drive from Cairns, it's a community there. There's about 5,000 Aboriginal people that live there. They all went bush, and they were making art while they were doing it. They were making artifacts. They were making spears. They were making boomerangs. They were doing all the cultural things that you kind of don't normally do. But there was an opportunity that kind of brought that on. So I guess what I can say is that art centres had to adapt, and artists had to work out what they were going to do and how they were going to do it best. And they all really wanted to be part of CIAF this year. So, and you'll see some of their work. You'll see their work in the virtual galleries when you go on the website. And a lot of that just came about living in COVID, basically. I don't know how they did it, but everybody just sort of embraced it and just went along with it. I mean, I'm sure they were full of anxiety, and probably a bit of depression crept in. And it was all that not knowing what was going on. And I'm sure with the elders especially, there was reminders of the mission days when you could not go. You were housebound. You could not move from your community because the white man said you couldn't go anywhere and you had to get permission and all that kind of stuff. But there were similar things going on here. There were protests at Yarrabah community, and there was a blockade that was going on there, and the community just got together and they had decided to have a protest. You know, they were chanting things like, "This isn't a lockdown; it's a lock up," because they felt like that oppression that they felt by the whole COVID restrictions was just, you know, bringing back those memories of those oppressive policies that happened to Aboriginal people. So, yeah, that's what was going on. But I'm so glad that artists, you know, kind of went ahead and decided, well, we're not going to let that take over our lives. We want to get back to culture, and I'm sure that was all part of their decision to better their health and well-being as well. They didn't want that to sort of take over and being that sort of living in that anxiety and all that changing environment. They just sort of wanted to get back to culture and create. you know, and you know, it's all about that health and well-being, and that's what happened pretty much.
Yes, I mean the Cairns Indigenous Art Fair is a major event in Australia, in Queensland and Far North Queensland. And prior to 2019 or 2020, though that event had been building and growing with so many thousands and thousands of viewers, you know, like physically going through that whole event. So this year was totally different. Yeah, had to think about ways on how you're going to be able to like go online and sell the work and expose work. Thank you, Janina. Diab, would you like to come on now and have a bit of a conversation about how things have been for you up in the Torres Straits? Thanks.
Yeah, so obviously remote communities were in lockdown at the beginning, and we had, well, in terms of family, I had to bury my cousin the first day the sort of rules came in, so that was quite hard culturally to have a large Torres Strait Islander gathering in Surrey business, because it was only 10 people at the funeral, and that just really is not possible. So that was quite heartbreaking. We ended up having 10 people in the church, but of course 100 people outside. And so that really, and all the authorities were watching us and how we were conducting ourselves. So it was quite tense and quite scary, really. But thankfully, we had no cases up in the Torres Strait Islands. Some family was stuck in the Cairns and North Queensland because they couldn't go back in to the restricted zone, and that caused a bit of stress for families. So I think, and also they couldn't get back to funerals. I think that was such a big thing. We had family, a lot of our families work and live in Western Australia, and particularly around young families wanting to come back to pay respects. It was quite a difficult time. Culturally, yeah, so I think we've kind of managed now. Obviously we can go fishing, but it was quite hilarious. The restrictions were only 2 people in a dinghy at a time going fishing, the social distancing in a dinghy, and we're like, how's that going to go? Because normally island people like to go out and have a picnic in a dinghy with lots of people in the dinghy. So yeah, it was quite interesting. There was lots of people, lots of dinghies going out, and we still were able to practice our culture and be able to fish and hunt. But it also impacted certain cultural ceremonies around our tombstone, which is a gathering of family after obviously putting a headstone on the grave, which is signifying the end of the mourning period. Those kind of things were restricted for families even wanting to come in from the outer islands of the Torres Strait to Thursday Island, and it also stopped families taking their cultural responsibility around hunting for food for those ceremonies. So yeah, it was a big thing at the time, but we're pretty relaxed at the moment. Yeah.
How do you think that the artists fair, were you able to go online did they still create their work? Did they go online to sell their work? How did they manage that? How did you manage that?
Well, I think it was great that they participated obviously in the Cairns Arts Fair. That was good to see our artists be part of that. But yeah, I think in terms of creating work, it's hard, obviously not being in the same space. In terms of performing arts, our cultural festival, which was planned for this year, was postponed. So obviously that's a big gathering. Normally we all get together. Yeah, but I think it also makes people think about how they can promote their work online more, and I think it's kind of interesting to maybe do that.
Thank you, Diad. Dipti, would you like to come into the conversation? Tell us a little bit about how the artists are managed, how the arts workers are managing, and how you're doing things over there. Thanks.
Yes. So I think the situation in India in many ways echoes what Janina and Diat have already spoken about, that it has been very tough for just the arts across the board, because as some of you may know, that there isn't really a lot of infrastructure and government support, especially in terms of funding, that exists for the Indian cultural sector. In India, as is true with pretty much everything else, there is a huge range of artists and situations. So there are, of course, the artists who tend to work in perhaps urban areas that are perhaps financially independent, and so have been able to take this opportunity to reflect, to go back to their artistic practice and to perhaps devise new work, new ways of working. There are also those artists who have been able to do interesting things digitally. So some examples are, there's a company in Mumbai, a theater company called QTP that pivoted, that adapted their theater show, which normally happens in a theater setting, but they, I think, successfully pivoted to a digital platform and did a play on Zoom. So that's one example of artists working with digital platforms. Another artist, also based in Mumbai, has collaborated with a technologist and created something called Art Square Foot, which is a platform for performance, which is different from Zoom. There are other artists who have reflected, but then instead of creating art, they've looked at more operational work. So there's a theater company that's created a whole resources section for theater artists, all of which is based on practice learning, more I'd say theory based. And then of course, ACRI, we have tried to create a COVID-19 resources page, which addresses immediate concerns for the arts and culture sector across the board. But there are other really interesting examples of, in Bangalore, for instance, there's a contemporary dancer called Diya Naidu who has created something called the Circles of Resilience, which is not necessarily arts-based, but it's a support and sharing platform where artists come together to talk about their concerns. Now, this started quite soon after the pandemic hit and the lockdown hit, but that's something that has been a source of great comfort to artists. And I feel that there are lots of local initiatives like this that have cropped up. Another trend that we've been seeing at ACRI is just the rise of workshops, and this works from the audience perspective, where it's a way to engage, to share your art in a space where perhaps performance is not possible, but a different way to engage your audience with the art. But then also it becomes a possible way to earn a little bit of money through paid workshops. And yet there is, I think we've all noticed, there's a shift towards learning. How can we learn more in a space where we can't perhaps present art? So that's another trend that we've noticed. And I'll just mention two more things. One is something that I learned of recently. There's an organization in the east of India, and perhaps Ruchira will be able to talk about that as well. There's an organization working with folk artists to help them become more digitally savvy. So that's one thing. But then underscoring all of this are the artists who are not financially independent, who have had to go back to non-artistic work, in some instances selling vegetables to make sure that they are able to support their families. So there's just a range of what we've been able to see in the creative sector.
Oh, thank you, Dipti. Can I just remind everybody that I've got a Zoom captain that is keeping time, and that can I invite you, Ruchira, please?
Yes, thank you for that reminder on time. So I will try and restrict, but echoing what Dipti said, I think we have a diverse range of artists from diverse backgrounds, and people have responded differently. I think one word that all of us would perhaps agree with is resilience. I think artists have shown resilience in great measure in trying to deal with the situation. In East India, especially in West Bengal, apart from COVID, we also had a super cyclone, which just left like a huge amount of devastation and property, homes, etc. And while artists have found different ways of dealing with it, some of them have definitely tried to move on to the digital platform. Some of them are still trying to use this time for research and building on what they can do themselves. And but what is most heartening is how artists have come together to support each other. I think the amount of solidarity that one has seen, whether it is in terms of organizing forums to share knowledge and exchange ideas, or to actually provide financial support by raising money through crowdfunding, or through hosting an online festival which would raise money to then support other artists. I think those initiatives have been really, really wonderful. What we did, I'm aware of the time, so I'll quickly say what we did at Art Think South Asia. Right in the beginning, as early as March, April, we decided to reach out to all the South Asian-based arts managers who are part of our network, and just created a space for them to share, because that was so important. We were all in this new, uncertain space, and I think it really helped to find strengths from each other. So we had a series of online sessions where we just, opened it up for people to meet and share. And initially it was just to our network, and then we opened it out to arts managers and practitioners across South Asia. And at Think Arts, we again did a few masterclasses for teachers and arts practitioners, because this was a new space. How do you use the screen to share your practice? And we realized that the digital space isn't something that artists had really worked in much before. So we initiated a small grant for artists to create new work in the digital space. And the best response we got was that you gave us some impetus to create work. So
Thank you, Ishira. Priya.
Thanks, everyone. And Diat, I just wanted to acknowledge your sorry business. I know this has not been easy on so many people. We're hearing about so many deaths of loved ones and all over, and families being separated by borders, and all kinds of losses that have been happening. And I think this mourning that we've all gone through during COVID for different reasons is really heartfelt, and widely everybody is really looking at themselves and their relationship to family and community in much deeper ways. I'll wear my hat as the festival director of Sangam, the South Asian Performing Arts Festival of Diaspora, a performing arts festival here in Naarm, where we've really been able to work with artists, as all of you have already said, through online workshops. We postponed the delivery of the festival to next year, realizing that COVID was not going to make it possible. And luckily, after the second lockdown that we all had in Melbourne for 4 months, 5 months, whatever, time is endless, and recently got released from parole, we're all just sort of looking at next year. But what has happened this year is this building of international networking, something we never imagined possible, really just taking off in such deep and profound ways between artists located not just in India, but in Sri Lanka, in Pakistan, Bangladesh, and also in North America, Canada, and Europe. We've really been able to bring people together in very unique ways, and extremely renowned artists who have time on their hands suddenly, that we're able to access them and make them help us as mentors and guides for the sector and the emerging artists here. And that has been a huge blessing through COVID, that we've actually, exactly what you're all saying, people are interested in learning, training. And so it's made it, COVID has actually enabled the possibilities of people engaging internationally from their living rooms, family rooms, kitchens, whatever it is. And we're seeing a huge explosion of people committing to practice and not necessarily product, which I think is enabling very different kinds of discussions of what does it mean to actually have meaningful exchanges, meaningful development of artistic work. And so that's been really exciting to have that. And also I was involved in a online, I would say a sharing that Maria Randall one of the First Nations artists who lives in Jabberong country, set up and actually connected Indigenous artists from North America, the US, Canada, and artists in Australia as well. And actually some artists from Indonesia, I think, as well in that. And that has been really amazing because it has also helped us create work within that community, even though it's a private closed group, but it's really to motivate and help each other get through this period, because those of us that are both artists and also producers and directors also have found that the need has been so great that we haven't thought about nourishing ourselves, something that we're able to do sometimes in other sort of moments, but we haven't been able to do. And so that has also been a really great sort of closed group sharing of creating artistic work that has no public outcome, but just learning and working with each other. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
No? Can everybody hear me? My internet is
Yes, we
unstable.
can, January.
Oh, good on you. Okay, then. The idea of travelling for cultural exchange seems a thing of the past. Will travel be a part of our future? And how will we do cultural exchange in this changing environment? Can we just have 1 minute each for everybody to respond to that? I mean, we could have really lengthy conversations in this because it is so interesting. But just for today, Janina, can I just have a comment, please, from you?
I would love to go back to travelling again. I think that's the best way that we operate.
Yeah.
As artists and as, you know, especially for us, you know, First Peoples of this country, when COVID came out, we couldn't hug each other anymore. We nearly, you know, we just about died, and, you know, our hearts sank. We couldn't embrace anymore. It was terrible.
Our greeting, yeah.
It was horrible. So the best way is to, you know, we want to have a physical event. You know, I can just only talk about CIVE, and I would love to have a physical event back next year. But if we can't, we'll just go online again and just produce all those wonderful things that you'll see that you can have a look at on the special NAIDOC website. Yeah, but you know, we get 50,000 people coming to our physical event. We get even more when we go online. So, you know, we've reached 80 countries around the world, you know.
Yes.
Saw us for the first time.
Fabulous. Fantastic. Rashira, could I just ask you to have a bit of a comment on this? Thanks, Bob.
Yes, I miss the hugs. I mean, that's something that we you know, I can't wait to get back to that. But I think where it comes to travel, especially international travel with the global, you know, climate change and the global warming, I think this was something that we were already thinking of how to reduce it. And I think that's just, you know, we are thinking of it a little more. And I don't think we should stop travel, because travel is, you know, I mean, going to a new space, new place is probably the best way to soak in the culture and inspire and, you know, exchange. But perhaps we'll find a way in which the travel can be more efficient, and maybe we don't have to have large crews traveling. You know, maybe the freight we'll look at doing things differently. But yes, I don't see it. I don't think we should definitely stop it. I just think there'll be a new way that we travel, where we are more considerate of the environment and you know, the impact that we are creating.
Yeah. Dia, did you want to come in now, because I think you're wanting to leave to do something, or you're right to still stay in the conversation?
No, I've just got a little person doing dangerous things in the background.
Okay.
No, she's all right. Yeah, no, I think it's exciting to travel again, but obviously safety first. I think it's important, to use technology, and I think it opens our minds to being more creative. So I look forward to challenging myself. One of the things we're doing in the radio station is creating more opportunity for mainland Torres Strait Islanders to participate in our conversations in the homeland in the Torres Strait. So we do a radio program every week to highlight all the creative arts during COVID, and we interview mainland Torres Strait Islander artists. Janina, we've got to get you on next. Yeah, so that's been a way to be a bit creative, but also re-engage our families across the country. But maybe the next episode might be Indigenous artists that are based overseas. So there you go.
Yeah. Thank you, Diad. Priya, would you like to come in now into the conversation? Thanks.
I think it will be mixed. I think we are changed through COVID. We actually see the possibilities of less environmental impact. And so I think we can't go back to the rampant ways we were traveling and unnecessary travel, but that's not to say we would stop. I think we definitely need the ways of being with each other in embodied ways, and that kind of experience is, I think, really significant. Like, I remember when one of my collaborators from your new country came with me to South India, and we went to a village in Tamil Nadu, and she looked more like she belonged there than I did. And that shock for her and for the whole group was like, wow, look at these connections. And I don't think that's something you can have online or Zoom or whatever. It's something that has to be felt and lived and really experienced. And so, yeah, I think we have to have hybrid models where we use the COVID to get the best of what we need, but at the same time, I think strategically we plan when the actual physical visits are required.
Thanks, Priya. Dipti.
I feel like I'd be echoing much of what everyone else on this call says. I feel like there is, I don't think we can hold back the arts community from traveling. It's almost part of what we do. It's inspirational, right? But I do recall a conversation that I had yesterday with someone who ran a fellowship. Her name is Archana, and she represents an organization called Jaga. They ran a fellowship, an international fellowship, and in a very niche space, in the tech arts space. And she was telling me this is something that is always a problem in the arts, right? Budgets. How do we facilitate cultural exchange while working with the budgets, often small, that we have? And because it's tech arts and because we're working digitally, she was able to have speakers and facilitators from, I think, 4 or 5 different countries. So that kind of cultural exchange, which is not just the practice of art, but also the ideas that wrap around it, right? The infrastructure of it, the policy, what are the arts administration ideas that vary and somehow find congruence across different countries? Can there be sharing of that as well, which is just as important? And how can we take advantage of this perhaps lull period? Because I'm hoping and assuming that it's going to pick up again. How do we switch or put on different hats in the lull that we can all do collectively?
Networks have been keeping us connected. How has this helped, and will Zoom replace travel for relationship building? And what would be the benefits? Even this event is online, Zoom via YouTube. So when you look at the economics of it, how does that actually balance out to the physical travel? Janina, thank you.
Well, I guess I wouldn't have met any of you, except I already know Diat, unless we were doing this Zoom. So I think it, it can be beneficial, because of the costs. And I know it's really hard to get funding to go overseas and travel in the arts. It's really hard. So I think Zoom, using platforms like this, would be great just to initially collaborate if you had a project going on. I mean, I don't see anything, you wouldn't have to spend weeks and weeks and weeks in a certain place. you could do it all on Zoom and then get together towards the end kind of thing of the project. Cultural exchange, that was a question before that. That's what I think. Yeah, I think it is necessary now because of COVID. None of us know when this is going to be over. This could be, be hanging around for the next few years. So I think it is a necessary platform for us to just share ideas and get together like we are today.
Janina, do you think this will work well in in Cape York and in the lead up to kayak, to the big events, that it could minimise your travel? Therefore, when you think about time and everything, it's a great way to go.
But even it's limited too, because you're not there. You can't have all the artists on the Zoom. You know what I mean? So you can only talk through a couple of them at a time. So it does have its restrictions. And once again, it's also about having that physical connection with people. That's what we do. That's what we love as First People. So I don't know about that, but I mean, it has its purpose. It has its good points that we could, certainly carry on through this whole COVID period and beyond, I guess, to keep it going. Now, and I'm sure a lot of people know how to use it now, especially now.
Yes, that is so true. Diab, would you like to come into the conversation now and just reflect on this? You could.
I think it's important for sharing exactly what Janina said. I didn't know anybody apart from January. And so you get excited when you go, oh my gosh, there's this deadly people around the world you can talk to, and think about amazing things to work in the future towards. And I think particularly in a remote community, living in a remote community and trying to be creative is very hard, because you've got all the cultural obligations, the pressure, but also it's more relaxed. So you've got to be the catalyst for change as an artist in that sort of situation. So constantly trying to, get other artists and community activated. So yeah.
I've got a comment on online here that's just come in from Arts Nexus. Even in the Torres Straits, travel is restrictive for one-off meetings, for example. Arts Nexus has been coordinating the Torres Strait Writers Network through Zoom in a way we could never have done before, and DIAT is part of that. Yeah, thanks, DIAT. Priya, would you like to respond to this?
Well, interestingly enough, I met these folks at Arts Front in the middle of COVID. And we actually started, I was part of the Little Lunches series, along with Veronica Pardo, the CEO of MAV. And we started doing these little lunches, which was really about networking and exchange, to artists in India, to artists in, all over, like Mexico, people working on the border. And so it was very interesting. We were able to get, for example, Nimi Raphael, who is one of the directors of Adi Shakti at Puducherry, on Zoom, and she normally would resist that. Adi Shakti is like, no, we're not coming online, stuff that's not happening. But through COVID, I think they realized, well, maybe we can a little bit, and Nimi then got on her phone, got the Zoom downloaded, and she was sitting there in this beautiful place that they are, and we're all jealous because it was the middle of Melbourne winter, and chatting with her. It was so amazing. And I know that we all really appreciated the insights she brought from the place that she was, which we wouldn't have really had access to, without us being on Zoom, for example. And similarly, we also had, we had many different kinds of artists over the lunches, local, national and international. And we really looked at the idea that we sort of talked about, the global local. What does it mean to be global now? And how do we actually acknowledge where we are, and the situatedness of the politics of where we are? But at the same time, how can we make these connections internationally, nationally and transnationally? And it was really fruitful. And I think in a way, sort of having Arts Front sort of provide the platform, it really got a lot of people aware around Australia, directors, thinkers, artists, creatives, producers, about what was possible to do despite COVID and through this whole sort of, you know, lockdown and everybody sort of looking inward. But it was very good to strategize and looking at how local strategies, how, you know, Minerva on the border in Mexico was really living between Tijuana and San Diego, and literally living on the border. And how was she negotiating COVID in these two different places, given the politics of where she was, and how was she creating art through that whole process? And similarly with NIMI, what were the constraints that they had to deal with, and how have they sort of worked within their own structures? Like, how have they looked inward, really sort of focused and created a beautiful new play that is now coming out as a result of their work through lockdown and COVID, and so on. And so it was really, I think it was really interesting. And I think that the more organizations actually commit to real cultural exchange, using Zoom as the starting moment to look outside of our navel, you know, like really stop this navel gazing that sometimes happens here in the white arts sector that we all counter in so many different ways. I think it can be really helpful. Sorry, one more thing I have to say, Deepti, you mentioned earlier Dia's work of creating these circles online. There's also Masum and others have created the Dancers Den. And so there've been these really great sort of portals online as well, that people are finding there's space now to discuss the difficult things. Yeah. And out of this has also emerged like the need I see for artists to really educate themselves. And people have been coming and saying to me, can you teach us a course online to understand our histories? How do we do this? And so, you know, I wouldn't have done it before, but actually now through COVID, I am teaching these private sessions for artists in ways to create knowledge sharing. So I think networks are keeping us connected, and there is a lot of positives that can come from what we see as a really hard and negative time for all of us. And I live in a lot of hope about the connections that can be maintained and how we can continue to grow and develop.
Thank you, Priya. Norm from Arts Front has said that Priya has ran some wonderful little lunch sessions. So thank you for that. Dipti, would you just like to follow on from here now, please?
Thank you. I'm going to take an example of something that's happening in Chennai, which is where Priya has roots. There's something called the Madras Music Festival, which is a huge, very, very interesting example of a cultural festival that the entire city gets involved with through sabhas or assemblies, if you will. And it doesn't have one organizing committee. It's a collaborative event. And the reason I bring this up is we're talking about networks and what keeps us connected. One thing that I find that we've all lost, which is very much a part of the festival experience, is the food. And food as a cultural experience, which is very much a part of this particular music season, is something that has come up that's being lost. But recently, in a conversation with one of these assemblies that is part of the music season, and one of the organizers said that the pandemic has brought about something that is completely unimaginable. They've taken perhaps one of the most traditional, classical, art forms, and they're forcing them to go digital, right? So it's a positive spin on it, because now something that's incredibly perhaps inaccessible, just from a physical perspective. There are many, many levels of access, and Priya, of course, touched upon that separately, talking about access as privilege and looking at there's internet access, there's language access, there's cultural access, social access, so many levels of access. But just in this instance, technological access to an art form that perhaps wouldn't otherwise be broadcast worldwide. I think that's an excellent example that we're seeing in the Madras music season in South India. So just the ways that we're getting connected.
Thank you, Dipti. Rashira, would you like to say a quick word, thanks, because I'll have to be closing very shortly.
Yes, I think I echo with everything the others have said before. And just as an example, we recently had an international forum on the arts for children and young people. And we had speakers from over 13 countries and attendees from over 25 countries, something that I don't think we could have managed, in a physical space at all. So yes, absolutely, it has opened more doors. And there is, of course, a question of digital access, but this is given. We're talking in the space where there is, that access that people have to technology.
If I could ask one word to sum up our discussion this afternoon, our conversation, what would you say, Rashira?
I would say reimagining. Reimagine.
Reimagine, yeah, how about that? Dipti?
Layered. That's my one word, layered.
Right.
Layers.
Oh, layers. Okay. Priya? Could we have one final word?
I don't know if I can do one word. I've got several. But let's say connections is probably the strongest one.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Deanne, what about you?
Renewal is my word.
Renewal. Thank you. And Janina?
Opportunity.
Yeah, that's so true. That is so true. Our thanks to the Australian Consulate in Chennai, the Cairns Indigenous Art Fair, the RASIN program, Arts Nexus, the team at Arts Front. I would like to thank the guests for providing their insights and experiences. Never enough time for these conversations, as we all know. We could have done 2 hours or 3 hours easy and still be interested. I'd like to thank Diat Affelink, Janina Harding, Rashia Das, Dipti Rayo, and Rashima Chanwa, and Priya Srinivasan. Thank you, everyone, for joining the conversation. Thank you for joining us today. Please share, like, and comment through our Facebook to ensure our friends and family, or your friends and family as well, can celebrate NAIDOC Week with us. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, and thanks, Melissa Robinson, for captaining the Zoom and keeping us all on track. Where are you, Melissa? And thank you to Norm at Arts Front. And also thank you to our interpreters. A big thank you too. Okay. Cheers, everybody, and we shall see you again. You good?